Quebecers are struggling with rent hikes, hefty mortgages, and a housing market that has priced many people out.
More homes,
buying a home,
build homes.
So how can the federal government really help us get out of what many people are calling a housing crisis? Well, in Quebec, it's kind of complicated. For example, if a city like Montreal or Laval wants money from the federal government for things like housing, it has to ask and go through the provincial government first.
Every time we lose money negotiating between the different levels of government.
If you are confused about how funding for housing works here, you are not alone. That's why I asked 4 of the biggest city mayors in the province how the federal government can help them deal with the housing crisis to benefit their residents. It's more than just brick and mortar.
You have to plan for the underground infrastructure required to be able to, accept new units, whether they're homes or condos. And that becomes a huge challenge because it's extremely expensive. So it can't be on a municipality necessarily to finance that fully, or even an agglomeration, for example, like Longueuil. We're talking major numbers. Takes investment from the federal government.
The mayor of Laval says his prime example of where federal funding is badly needed is the extension of the Orange Line Metro deeper into his city. He says he has private investors ready to put up billions of dollars to build 20,000 housing units. But there needs to be commitment first.
One thing that could be good for the federal government is to support this project, which will not only benefit mobility on our territory, reduce green gas emissions, but also increase the number of housing being built in Laval.
Okay, let's pause here, get some things straight. Let me explain to you what role every level of government plays when it comes to housing in Quebec. The cities are responsible for zoning regulations and giving out construction permits. The province has its own programs for social and affordable housing and decides how it distributes the funds. The federal government collects the taxes and distributes the money to the province. A spokesperson for Quebec's housing ministry says that the province would accept funds from the federal government as long as it has no strings attached. The mayor of Quebec City says red tape is an issue, but the system overall needs to be changed so federal housing money makes it to the municipalities faster and the process is more streamlined.
But we need also the Quebec government and the Canada government to make us more agile, to deregulate some of the rules that are not very useful and that are there only to, I would say, to make it more complicated. It's not the goal, but at the end, that's the result. And we want a result, I would say, a better result.
One developer we spoke to said if some of the red tape is removed, more housing actually goes up. Less competition for places alone will cool down the rental market, and landlords will be less inclined to overcharge tenants. This housing expert says home building hasn't kept pace with the needs and demands of Quebecers.
It makes a lot more sense for the federal government to be making changes to the national building code and also creating a recommended zoning code for big cities and then for smaller cities.
The land owned by the federal government has become a hot topic as cities wrestle with the question of where to build more houses and how to make them more accessible.
We see in our streets more and more people, vulnerable people living in awful condition, and I feel like so that's the kind of extreme of people in needs to just get a roof on top of their head. But let's not forget about also the middle class that is definitely struggling.
Montreal Mayor Valérie Plante has been saying for years that a stable fund for social and affordable housing needs to be the first step to address the problem. Her administration just announced a massive plan to revitalize the Bridge-Bonaventure sector, a swath of land near the city's core that is 50% owned by the federal government. The plan is to build more than 13,000 new units and about half reserved as social or affordable housing. The city has already earmarked $125 million of its own funds.
At present, the federal funding doesn't allow deeply affordable housing, and the financing structure needs to change to finance in a sustainable long-term way much more new affordable rental.
Weitzman says the feds need to address the issue of financing as well. If the developers have the land, if they have all their permits but don't have the money to put shovels in the ground, houses don't get built.
So financing is probably the most important determinant of whether any developer, whether they be public housing or whether they be a private developer, can produce homes that are affordable to.
The federal government has a role to play in that because of programs it has to free up funding for private developers and public organizations. There are no shortage of housing announcements coming from the candidates, so when you are choosing how to mark your ballot, make sure you take a look at their platforms when it comes to housing announcements so you can make an informed decision.